what are the main offers that I have? What things do I delegate? What things do I not delegate?
If I'm the expert and this is my expertise and this is what I do and this is what I love to do, why would I give up any part of it? Hey there, and welcome to today's episode of Social Media Moneymakers, a Stan podcast. My name is Brock Johnson. I will be your host today, and today I am interviewing a powerhouse of Instagram knowledge, a true Instagram growth strategist who is going to help you figure out your entire Instagram game from growth to sales. Today's episode is going to be featuring none other than Maya Nickel. I don't know if I've ever been so excited to share one of these interviews with you. Truly, I also don't think I've ever taken more notes during the course of an interview than I did in this one today. Maya recently became a mom herself, so at the beginning of this interview, we talk about what it's like to run an Instagram during a busy season. We talk about how to prepare for busy seasons. We talk about scheduling posts and outsourcing things to team members, which she has a really interesting take on. If you're someone who's nervous about hiring a team or a staff, if you're someone who maybe has a virtual assistant, but you're worried about delegating different areas of your Instagram, the beginning of the conversation with Maya is going to be really interesting for you to listen to because her and I have slightly different perspectives, or at least I should say we have slightly different practices that we currently have in place around what we outsource and what we delegate regarding our Instagram growth and our Instagram strategies. After that, speaking of Instagram strategies, we are going to dive into all of Maya's Instagram strategies. We're going to talk about how she differentiates between different kinds of posts with different goals, because believe it or not every post should be trying to go viral. Some posts are for sales, some posts are for getting more views, some posts are for getting more comments. And so we're going to dive into how you can actually achieve those things. And we're going to talk about what happens when you miss your goals. What happens when you're not as consistent as you want to be? What happens when you don't have as much time as you thought you would have? What happens when you set sales numbers or sales goals and you don't quite hit those goals? I really appreciate how honest and transparent and vulnerable Maya gets during today's episode, and I hope you appreciate it as well. And then, of course, this is Social Media Money Makers after all. So towards the end of our conversation, we're going to dive into all of the different offers she has because, spoiler alert, she has quite a few different products, offers, courses, guides, and downloads that are available to her community. But we're going to figure out how she decides which ones to promote, when to promote them, or if she should promote them at all on her organic social, or if she should just tuck them away somewhere else. It's going to be a really fascinating conversation for you to listen to from start to finish. So grab a pen and a piece of paper, buckle up, because this is going to be packed full of so much Instagram knowledge. And without further ado, here's the interview. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Social Media Moneymakers. I am so excited to get to ask you questions today and interview you, pick your brain. I know we were talking off air about how weird this whole social media sphere can be, where you can get to know someone and learn about who they are and their values, but never actually meet. So this is
Yeah.
our first time meeting, but you're crushing it on Instagram, and I've always admired you, and we'll talk more about that later. But I'm just really excited and honored that you're on the podcast today.
Oh, the honor is all mine. Seriously, when you reached out, I was like, whoa, this is like a dream because I remember when I very first started my Instagram journey watching you, and now to be able to be on the podcast, I'm like, whoa, it's just like full circle moment to really see how far I've come. So thank you.
Oh, well, that makes me happy, and I appreciate that. And maybe that's a word of encouragement to anyone who's listening today. That hey, maybe one day they could be on the podcast as well. You never
Yeah.
know. But I want to start by addressing the current biggest shift that's happened in your life over the last few months, which is becoming a mom. So congratulations on that.
Thank
And I
you.
want to start by asking, because I know a lot of our listeners are parents or soon to be parents. So how did you prepare ahead of time for this busy season where you probably assumed you would have less free time to dedicate to Instagram?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I found out that I was pregnant in February of 2023. And I remember finding out that I was pregnant. And this is such a business owner thing to do, an entrepreneur thing to do. I was calculating, I was like, okay, when is this going to end up? And what do I have scheduled at that time? And I remember calculating it out and I was like, November, that's when I'm due. And I'm like, sweet, what's in November? Just potentially the biggest month of the entire year for most business owners with Black Friday and sales and all of that good stuff. And so I remember sitting there and I was like, at first I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do about this? Like my business, like is it even going to survive? Which obviously like spiral thoughts just happening. And then I sat with myself and I was like, you know what? This is such a cool challenge to be able to see how I can approach this busy season of my business with maternity leave happening, because I knew going into getting pregnant and all of that I wanted to take maternity leave at least a month, up to potentially 2 months. And so I was like, this is a great challenge to see how I'm going to be able to take time off and still make money. And so, as I was prepping for maternity leave, there are a few key things that I did. Number one, I've been grateful to be able to have been building a team over the last like 2 years leading up to when I originally first got pregnant. And so, having a team in place, very, very helpful. I know that that's not the case for every single person out there, but what I will say is if you don't have a team in place, that you can go out and find like independent contractors that you can potentially work with, like on a one-time basis. Like maybe you hire a copywriter to help you with your website. That was something that I did in getting set up for maternity leave, which the purpose of that was to help me to set up my business for sales in more of like an automated way. So like I wanted to have my website strategically set up so that if someone came to my website from my Instagram account, which was like part of my strategy, was driving a lot of traffic to my website, to my email list, if they got to that point, that my website was then hopefully converting them without me having to do a lot of like the heavy lifting of answering questions, because my website was going to do that. So that's something too, is if you're like, hey, I don't have a team, that's totally okay. There are a lot of people out there that you can hire like on a one-time basis to be able to help you out. Even if you just hire someone to help you, get a few posts created before you go on maternity leave or whatever. Even if you're not going on maternity leave, I feel like the same thing applies if you're going on like vacation. It's the same steps that you would be taking too. So if you're like, I'm not going to go on maternity leave anytime soon, don't tune out. Don't tune out. It's still applicable. But there were a lot of things that I did prior. So that was one of the things, was hiring a team. The second thing was thinking about my strategy of what I wanted to do when I was going to step away for that month, especially because it was my busy season. And so I did a lot of planning out emails in advance. So I planned out my emails actually 2 months prior to me even taking maternity leave, just in case there were like complications. I wanted to make sure that I had emails scheduled out. But even like on a deeper level than that, I wanted to make sure that all of my Instagram posts and like my Instagram stories were driving traffic to either my opt-in or specifically to like my wait list for an offer that I was launching during that time. And so I was really heavily utilizing Instagram, not just like for my focus at that time wasn't necessarily growth. It was like, how can I utilize what I have already built? Because I know that like I'm not really going to have the time and energy to put in, and the strategy to put in at this time to like really be able to grow. So how can I utilize what I already have to then leverage other areas where I can kind of automate a little bit more, which is like through the email marketing aspect of things, and through having a strategic website and having podcasts batched out. So that was kind of like, it was almost like, I mean, Instagram in general is my top of funnel, but like really strategically utilizing it to move people into different places of my business where there was automation. So I would say that was like my biggest strategy.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And that's so smart. I will say quickly about your website, was looking at it a lot over the last few days as we were kind of like preparing for this interview. Your website's beautifully done. It's very,
Thank
very
you.
well written. If anyone needs a good example of a website that very much mirrors the brand and the way you present yourself on social, you've done a really great job of that. So that's
Thank
really
you. I
awesome.
appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. And I think it's really helpful, I think, for a lot of people who are scared about hiring a team, that you kind of gave options, right? Like you could hire full-time employees and bring on a team, or you could start simpler, maybe easier, less intimidating, with some freelancers, some independent contractors who can come in on like a project basis or a month by month basis without having to bring them in full time. And then kind of the third layer is automating what you can ahead of time so that robots and technology and software can do a lot of the work for us. So I think that's really, really smart. I'm curious, in the preparation for your maternity leave, uh, did you alter your posting frequency when you were planning ahead? Was it like, hey, I'm going to dial it back so that I don't have to plan as much? And then kind of the second part of that question is, how far in advance did you plan specifically the posts? I'm curious, like, were your posts scheduled like 3, 4 months in advance, or was it a month in advance? I'm curious.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. So I did a lot of strategy and prep work prior to maternity leave, and there's really only one thing looking back that I wish that I had done, which is batch out and schedule my posts. And you might be thinking, why did you not do that? Well, I had every intention of doing that, but for me, I wanted to wait until kind of like the last second possible to like create this content just to make sure that it was up to date,
Yeah.
relevant, in terms of what my audience was needing at the time, in terms of what was going on Instagram, because Instagram, as you know, is always changing. And so I was like, okay, how can I wait until like the last second possible? And so for first time moms, like statistically, I was like Googling, I was like, statistically, when do first time moms usually give birth? And so
Oh
I
my
like looked it
gosh.
up, and it was like, I think it was like 5 days after their due date. And so like in my head, I was like, okay, I have until 5 days after my due date. And everyone who, had been pregnant and had kids in the past were like, okay, always shoot for after the due date. Like, just like have your mindset that like that's how long it's going to go. And so I went into my pregnancy with that mindset of like, oh, it's going to be that amount of time. And so I was like, oh yeah, I have plenty of time to still batch out content and schedule it. And that was 100% fully my intention. And I came 8 days early. And so my baby came 8 days early. And so I was like, well, crap, that kind of just ruined all my plans.
Yeah.
And so I had every intention. My intention going into it was I'm going to batch it out and I'm going to schedule it like using the in app scheduler inside of Instagram for 2 months in advance. So I was going to do all the month of November, all the month of December, fully batched out for feed posts. I wasn't going to batch out any of my Instagram stories just because I was just going to do that, like, just post whenever I could at the time. But that was my full intention. Didn't get around to doing that, sadly. And so what did it actually look like with me showing up during that time, because I didn't do the prep work that I thought I was going to be able to do? I didn't post very much, and I truthfully, like, full transparency, didn't hit my goals in terms of income in the month of November or December. And I, looking back now, I'm like, I still did pretty dang good for being in maternity leave, not having content to post, and just like new season of life. But I know that I could have hit those goals had I batched out my content and scheduled it, because like I was saying, my whole strategy was to utilize Instagram to drive traffic to my emails, and then to have these, automations set in place where I could then convert people, because I didn't have the batched out content, then that kind of shot myself in the foot there. So I didn't post very much. Like, I think in the month of November, again, transparency wise, I think I might have posted like 6 times, which is like not very much for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's a big drop. And I appreciate you being so honest and transparent. I know that's not always the easiest thing, especially in the world of entrepreneurship, to do. But I think a lot of people can learn from everything you just shared. So I want to go back to, you said you have a team.
Yeah.
And I know you probably have a mix of independent contractors, people who do odd job projects, and then people who are probably more full-time or day-to-day ops. So first question is specifically, how much does your team help you with the day-to-day of Instagram, and everything that's involved, whether it's, like planning posts, script writing, editing, and then how much of that do you do yourself and take full ownership of?
Good question. I do it all. I
Really?
do everything to do with Instagram. That, that's been a thing that I've kind of gone back and forth with a lot of times in my journey, especially as I've gotten busier with being a mom, is what things do I delegate? What things do I not delegate? What things do I love? What things do I not love doing? And for me, I've realized, and this is a huge reason why I started my journey in the first place, is because I love Instagram. I love content creation. Like, that is truly what sets my soul on fire. Like, I love the creativity aspect of it. I love the filming. I love the editing. Like, I love matching the music. And like, that is just, I don't know, like, that for me is like what makes entrepreneurship so fun, is like that aspect of it. And so I know a lot of people who do hand that off, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And for me personally, with my journey of hiring people, I've just had to take a step back and ask myself, what tasks do I love doing? What are the things that I don't love doing? The things that I don't love doing, that's usually where I'm going to be hiring out. And then also, too, where is my expertise and where is my expertise not at. And for Instagram, that is my expertise, and it's not to say that I couldn't hand off something that is my expertise, but I am more focused on handing off things that are not my expertise. So things like copywriting, things like podcast editing, things like handling like my customer support, like all those different things. Like those are things that I'm hiring out for. But for Instagram, I'm just holding on to it. I don't know if that'll be the case always, but for me right now, I'm the person that films, that edits, that posts. I'm doing the whole thing, and I really truly love it.
Yeah, well, that's awesome, and I'm glad to hear that you are so enthusiastic about it, and I think it's important too because oftentimes I feel like people approach Instagram as like a habit, or not a habit, excuse me. They approach it as something like that they have to do, like
Yeah,
a chore. That's the word I was looking for. And so if you can truly like learn to love certain aspects of it, or learn to love the entire thing, it's going to be a lot easier to stay consistent. I know myself, I was really scared early on to delegate and outsource parts of my Instagram
yeah,
because it's kind of like you were saying, like if I'm the expert and this is my expertise and this is what I do and this is what I love to do, why would I give up any part of it? So for me, I originally outsourced just kind of like responding to DMs and
yeah,
comments because I'm one of those people who like when you look at my email inbox, it says 0. It doesn't say like, a ginormous number in red. I have no unread text messages. I'm in a group chat of like 10 guys who send hundreds of messages a day. And I make sure that like that's always at 0.
yeah.
But I say that to just say I hired someone early on to help me first with DMs.
Hmm.
And then it expanded to be DMs and comments.
Yeah,
And then I hired someone to about a year ago to start editing my content.
yeah,
Just because I was like, I love editing. Like it's truly one of my passions, but it's not something that I'm amazing at. And it's also not something that I'm very fast at.
yeah,
So that was something I outsourced. And those little things have just kind of helped me, but I still do the rest of it myself. So the scripting, the planning, the coming up with like the idea, the focus, and all that good stuff. But I'm curious how many hours or minutes a day you spend now, especially now that you're a mom, now that you have other areas to focus on of your life. Like how much time does it take you to do all the Instagram related tasks in a day?
Ooh, good question. I'm gonna say prior to having a baby, it was so I was posting for the month or not for the month, for the year of 2023, I actually scaled
Hmm.
back. So in 2022, I was posting like anywhere between 6 to 9 times per week. 2023, I was like, let me see what it would be like to post less. So I was posting 3 times per week.
Mm.
And up until having baby, I would say probably on average per week, I was spending around like 8 hours per week on Instagram. And
Okay.
that's between like testing, experimenting, responding to direct messages, creating content, posting the content. And now post baby, it depends on the week. There are definitely some
Yeah.
weeks where I can be on Instagram more, but I would say on average, I'm probably looking at like 4 hours per week. So
Wow.
like cut in half now at this
Yeah.
point. And that's
Wow.
that's something else that we can have a conversation about too if you want. But I have scaled back on Instagram, but I'm actually making the same amount of money. And so I've kind of shifted my focus in my business to other areas. So,
Yeah. That makes sense. I'm gonna let's go there. Let's have that conversation because this is something I'm super curious about myself. So I'm gonna share my hypothesis,
hey,
and then you can tell me if I'm off base or not. So my
perfect.
guess is in 2023, as you decreased your frequency of feed posting, your engagement went up, but your growth rate didn't increase. If anything, it probably decreased compared to the year prior when you were posting more. But because your engagement went up, your income, revenue, sales went up. Was that close?
Good question. So, or good hypothesis. I love this. I can see your wheels turning, and I'm totally like, I love that we're chatting right now. Yes, that is pretty much exactly down to a T. So I still did grow in 2023. In
Totally.
2023, I grew I think 75,000 followers, but the year prior, I grew like 150,000.
Okay.
So,
Yeah,
yes,
that
it
makes
did
sense.
decrease.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I was super curious about that because in full transparency, you're the only person who's going to hear this besides the people listening. So like you and the listeners, they're a part of a secret inner circle right now. It's an inner circle of trust that cannot be broken. But I'm doing a test in March on my own account because I'm like crazy hyper frequency. I think Marketing Harry called it like hyper consistency, where I'm posting like 2 or 3 times a day
Yeah.
to my feed. Um, and the growth has been great, but the engagement definitely fluctuates. Like I'll have one post that'll go like really, really well. And then another post where I'm like, if someone sees this, they would not think I'm an Instagram expert. Um,
Yeah.
and and so I'm doing a test again. This is a secret. I'm doing a test in March where I'm going to significantly decrease my feed frequency and just see what it does. My
Yeah.
guess is it's going to do the same thing that it did for you, just on like a smaller scale.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm curious. I'm really curious to just break it down. I'm gonna start it. I say the month of March. Basically, within the first week or two, I'll like revisit it and see how it's going. But I'm very interested, and it's very interesting for me as well to hear how it affected your account. And I'm interested, how does it affect, or how has it affected your day-to-day business operations outside of Instagram? Do you have more time, energy, and focus for those things, or is it like, hey, I'm dedicating the same amount of time, energy, and focus for my business, but now I just have 4 to 8 extra hours a week that I can dedicate to my family and other things?
Yeah, good question. So, what I realized very, very quickly with having a baby is your time is not cut in half. It's cut into like a fourth of the amount of time. Like in my head, I was like, oh yeah, like I'll still be able to sit down. Like she'll take like 2 hour naps, a few times per day. Yeah, no. Like and obviously every baby's different. Love my baby girl all like with all my heart, but most of her naps are like 20 minutes. Sometimes they're 40 minutes. Very unpredictable schedule is basically what I'm saying. So some days I sit at my desk, some days I don't sit at my desk at all. Um, but what I've realized is what I call income producing activities and the importance of those in basically having that as the focus of my day to day is my income producing activities. And so, and the funny thing is, and I feel like every season of life teaches me something different, but in this season of life, I've always known how important it is to do your income producing activities, right? Like, obviously, as a business owner, you want to make money, you want to have sales coming in, but until you're put into a position where you only have like 2 hours a day to work or only 1 hour a day to work, you are really going to sit back and ask yourself, what are the most important things that I need to do during this time? And so, yes, I am spending more time with my family, but I'm also getting a lot more, I guess, strategic about when I sit down to work, what am I doing during my work day? And a lot of the times it's not spending as much time on Instagram. Instead, it's a lot more spending time with like improving customer experience or creating new offers or creating like systems and automations that are set up to sell people very passively because I'm in this season of life where I can't show up as much actively. And there are also truthfully days or even weeks now at in this season of life where I don't show up. So it's like, hey, how can I set up my business now to show up for me when I can't show up anymore? And so that's kind of like my focus right now in this season.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know you made a post recently about how, again, a very transparent post, which I really admired, is you were like, "Hey, it's been easy to come back to stories. It's been easier to come back to like my business and those sorts of things." But specifically, coming back to posting consistently on the feed has been presenting some challenges for you recently. So I'm curious how you have stayed consistent, or kind of like what you've done to make it a little bit easier on yourself because you now recognize that it wasn't as seamless as other areas.
Yeah, I will say I'm still figuring out the consistency aspect, if I'm being quite
Mhm.
honest with you. When it comes to feed posts and postpartum life, we're just figuring things out one day at a time. And I mentioned this in the post too, but consistency in this season of my life, especially with showing up in feed posts, it looks different. It looks different than how it did when I was pregnant and before I even had a baby, and I think that that's something that is another like huge realization for me is like it's okay for consistency to look different in each season of life. But I think right now for me, showing up and how I've kind of like what that looks like for me right now is whenever I have a really good idea, I'm going to create the content and I'm going to post it. And I'm almost Right now for me, truthfully, like if I'm trying to, I like to say like, what is the phrase like that I try to use? Like making like the barrier to entry as easy as possible. Like so, like if there's any sort of thing that like is restrictive or anything that's like really hard for me, it's like, okay, how can we cut that out in some sort of way? And so for me right now, like thinking about consistently posting Monday, Wednesday, Friday is going to give me all sorts of anxiety because that's going to be really hard for me just in this season of life. Like last week, for example, my baby girl was very sick. I was very sick. I was truthfully like totally out, and so I think if I had given myself that restriction of like, okay, you have to show up Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that would have given me so much anxiety. And so for me right now, it's like, okay, when can I show up? That's when I'm going to show up. And knowing that like this season is going to end, and I'm going to be able to show up more heavily and probably even a few months from now once I have a more consistent schedule, but also too, like not just looking at it from the Instagram perspective of like how am I showing up there, but also recognizing that I have other areas of my business that I'm showing up in too. And I think again, prior to having a baby, that would have like I can't even imagine looking at my Instagram right now. Like that would have like I would have been like, there's no way that Maya's business is surviving, that how can she even do that? But now it's just like, oh, well, I'm making it work, and like that's how it is in this season.
Yeah, totally. That totally makes sense. If you had a genie and you could create clones of yourself, would you, with all of these, like 12 different copies of yourself, would you want to post every day, multiple times a day? Would you still want to keep it 3 times a week? Would you want to kind of stick with where you're at now with kind of when you can? Or like what are your thoughts there from a, take off the mom hat, take off the
Yeah.
business owner hat, and just like pure Instagram strategy point of view?
I would definitely want to be posting every single day. At least 6 times a week. For me, I always take off Sundays like completely off of social media just to help with the whole burnout thing, but I would say at least 6 times a week for sure. I love it. I love being able to put out the content, more impact, more sales from that as well too. And so I think that it makes sense in terms of like my overall goals to be posting that amount, but also again, it's yeah, just different seasons. But I know that I was supposed to take off the seasonal
Yeah.
hat. So
Yeah, no, that's helpful to know though. I was curious, especially, because even before this season, you had the year of 2023 where you were posting less frequently. And so I was curious about that. I said that there's quite a few things I admire about your work and your posting. And one of the things that I probably admire the most is that you don't promote gimmicks, like you don't chase hacks. You're not posting about like the latest random viral hack growth strategy that you can, beat the algorithm with. And I feel like that is very alluring for a lot of people who do what you and I do, because that those posts work. Those posts
yeah.
go viral because they grab people's attention or they scare people or they create FOMO. But I never ever see those from you, and so that means, of course, number one, that's flipping awesome. But number two, that means that you are teaching and showing up, just showing us the core values. Like, here's what you need to do. Here's the best practices. Forget the fluff, focus on these main things. And so my question is, what would you say are the most important keys specifically to growing your following on Instagram? Like, is there a 3-step formula? What are those key elements?
Ooh, good question.
And I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to my mind when you ask that question is really digging deep into like your key differentiating points. And what I mean by that is like what makes you different than other people in your niche. And this might take doing a little bit of like what I call a competitor analysis and looking at those other accounts in your niche and really diving deep into like, okay, what's working well for them? What's not working well for them? What are some things that like they're posting about that you don't agree with? What are some things that are post that they're posting about that spark some ideas? And like how can you figure out like what gaps there are in the industry that you can fill based off of like your own personal experiences, your own knowledge? And so that for me, like when I think about like my Instagram journey, and it is a journey, right? Like it's so easy for me to sit here and say, "Oh yeah, find your key differentiating points." And I would say for most people, that's not going to be something that you sit down within the next 30 minutes and then figure out. Like maybe one or two people that's going to be the case listening, but for me it's been this journey of like really uncovering different things that like I wish that I was seeing in the industry. And so something that I really pride myself on that I feel like is one of my key differentiators is speaking to the things that I'm feeling. So it's like, I'm not growing on Instagram right now, like being honest about that. Like, yeah, I'm an Instagram growth coach, but like, I'm not growing on Instagram right now, you know, and actually, truthfully, again, for transparency, I haven't grown on Instagram in the last, I think, 5 months. And so like that's just something where it's like, let me bring that to the forefront. But then also too at the same time, it's like that post that you were just talking about where I was talking about how hard it has been for me to come back and post feed posts. It's like just that type of honesty where like I like when I very first started my Instagram growth journey, I wish that I had seen those things. And like to me, like I'm thinking about what do I wish that I had seen? What do like I hear my students saying, and like how can I almost bring like a voice to like how can I be their voice,
Mhm.
almost like projecting that on the platform, you know, and being a better example to people than just like, hi, you have to post, you know, 6 times a day and like that's that. And you know, and it's like that's the only way to be successful, you know, and obviously like there's its success to that for sure. But I would say that like for me, it's been that journey of really finding that key differentiator and then also having the confidence to like bring that to light. And that's like a whole nother thing too. So that's the very first thing that I would say in terms of like Instagram growth, because in any niche, there's a lot of people. Like there's a lot of people in any niche. It's not just Instagram coaches. Like if you're a postpartum fitness coach or if you're doing recipes and sharing meal, like there's a bunch of people. So it's like, what are you going to do to set yourself apart and just really like I think asking yourself that every single day. And a question for me that has been really impactful on my journey is this was posed by one of my coaches. She asked me, "What do you want to be known for?" And I remember when she asked me that question at the time, like with what I was posting, how I was showing up, which there was nothing wrong with it, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And I was growing and I was working and I was making money. But asking, when she asked me that question, I really took a step back and I was like, ooh, what do I want to be known for? Is it more than just an Instagram coach? Like, what is that like almost like legacy that I'm leaving on my community? And so, like, taking it a step further versus just like, hi, have a niche. And then, like, what is like the industry that you're in? And like, what is your title? It's like, yeah, all those things are great. And yes, you can be an expert in all of those things, but like, what is that legacy that you want to leave people? So that can kind of just, and truthfully, the reason why I'm saying this, and I promise this totally applies to growth, is when you take that perspective and you put that into every single post that you are posting, it's going to change the way that you show up and post your content. So that's like my number one piece of advice.
I love that. That's really great for people to think about. Do you think it's possible to niche down too far or to differentiate yourself too much? Like, is that a thing? Because I hear people are often very worried about that.
Yeah, good question. I will say there is a point where you could niche down too much. And what I like to think about here, and I had a client one time when we were chatting, and she's 100% an expert in what it is that she does. But she came to me and she was like, "Hey, how do I grow more on Instagram?" And, you know, I did an audit of her Instagram account and we had been working together for a few months at this time. And I went back and I looked at her Instagram account and I was like, you know what? You're getting really great engagement. You're getting really great reach. And she was reaching non followers. And she's like, well, why aren't these people converting into followers? And I just sat down with her and I had a really honest conversation. And I was like, think about the amount of people out there who are like your ideal follower. And for her specifically, there weren't a lot of people out there who would be like her ideal follower. She had a very, what I would consider, small niche. Now, does this mean that you can't be successful? No, definitely not the case. You can still make sales, you can still grow a really great community, but your community might only be 10 or 20,000 people instead of 100, 200, 1 million, you know, people. And so I think that that's something where it's like, yes, I do believe that there is like almost like too niche, but also at the same time though, like you could be too niche and just come to terms with like it's okay that I'm only going to reach, like this max amount of audience. Does that make sense? Like there's almost like a ceiling there for some people where it's like, just based on the population size of their ideal audience, like they might only reach, 5 or 10,000 people. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's like making sure that you're being honest with yourself that, like, that's the
Yeah.
only,
Yeah, that totally makes
like,
sense.
people you're gonna reach.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. Like, if I'm thinking like, pictures of or videos of cute puppies, like that has a really, really high ceiling because a lot of people will like that.
Yeah,
Someone like an Instagram coach like you and I, like there is definitely a ceiling, but the ceiling is somewhere it's not like, hundreds of millions. I doubt anyone's ever going to reach hundreds of millions as an Instagram coach, but there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, probably even millions of people who have a small business that they want to grow on Instagram.
yeah,
And to your point, I think it's just different definitions of success because for some people, like you said, maybe their audience has a cap at 20,000, but if they reach 20,000 followers and they have a super loyal, engaged community who is becoming customers, and probably if it's that small in that specific a community, they're probably able to charge more or higher ticket for the things
yeah.
they're offering. And so, yeah, success can look different for everyone. I think that there's this weird misconception that success is 100,000 followers or success is 1 million followers when it's really different from business to business and niche to niche.
For me, like, looking at the people that I've hired as, like, coaches that I've spent the most amount of money on, all of them have under 10,000 followers, and, like, they're making a great amount of money and a great impact on people. And so I think that like that's the whole followers equals amount of money. It's definitely not the case. And so like you can have a small following and make great amounts of money, and you could also have a really big following and not make any money.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very true. Absolutely true. I would love to talk more about like making money and sales and products and offers and all of that in just a second. But first, I want to quickly have a hypothetical. So if you're someone listening and you have around 1,000 followers, your reels are performing worse in the later half of 2023 and 2024 than they were at the beginning of 2023 and 2022, and you're not gaining any followers, what would you recommend they check out first? Like, should they look specifically at their posts and do better hooks? Should they write better captions? Should they do more stories? Should they revisit like what differentiates them? What would you kind of tell them to look at before anything else?
I would definitely say hooks would be the very first thing, and then also length of the reel. And so let me start with hooks and then I'll talk about length. So with hooks, something that I realized within it honestly was about halfway through 2023, I started doing some experiments and just started looking at content that was showing up on my explore page, content that was going viral, and just really like looking at it from like the like studying type of lens, like, oh, what's working, what's not working here. And what I realized is the classic hooks of like 5 tips for XYZ or how to do XYZ are not performing as well anymore. And I think it's just because people are so used to seeing that type of content. It's like it's no longer eye catching anymore. And so I think that having more creative hooks, or what I would consider storytelling hooks, are really, really powerful. And so a storytelling hook is, instead of it being like how to do XYZ, it's like what I learned on my journey of going from blank to blank. It's like now people are drawn in because they're like, oh, well, what did she learn on this journey? Or instead of, how to do XYZ or 5 tips for XYZ, it's like what my failures have taught me about blank. And so kind of taking it from that perspective more. So I would say getting more creative with hooks, but also something else I see with hooks as well, not necessarily with creativity, but when people are utilizing hooks, what I like to think about is if you took this one individual post and someone saw this on their explore page, they only saw this one post from you, would they understand what your niche is and who it is that you are trying to talk to? And the reason
Mhm.
why I like to think about it in that way is because when I go to a lot of Instagram accounts to do audits, and because they're not growing, I think about it like this, and I'm like, okay, I don't know who you're talking to. And so they're not specific enough with their hooks. So I might just say like how to make money, okay, that's great. But like, if you're trying to grow your Instagram account, you got to get more specific than that. Because here's the thing,
Mhm.
you might say a hook of how to make money, and your ideal audience might be moms, but I might see that post on my explore page, and I might be someone who's working a corporate job. Like, I might not be your ideal audience, but because that hook wasn't specific enough, I'm going to tap into that post. I'm going to look at your Instagram account, and then I'm going to see your bio, and it's going to say how to make money for moms, or something along those lines,
Mhm.
hopefully a little bit more specific. But I'm not going to want to follow you, right? Because it's not specific
Yeah.
to me. And so I like to say, get specific with the language inside of your post. So that way, if I saw that on my explore page, I'm going to know, oh, yes, that is for me. Now, is that to say that, if you are teaching how to make money for moms, that needs to be the hook of every single post, and that you need to include the word for moms in every single post? No, definitely not the case. But getting specific there with the language is definitely really powerful. And then that leads me into the second piece, which is another experiment that I did um, more towards the end of 2023 as well, which is the length of different reels. And I would actually love to hear your perspective on this too. But I did
Mhm.
a few different tests where some of these reels were 3 seconds long, and then some of these reels were like 15 seconds long. And I had a lot of these reels. I would say almost all of the reels that I posted with more of like the storytelling approach to them that were a little bit longer performed really well. And so this is such a different shift though, because when reels came out, they were a lot of like short, like super short form, like, do 2 seconds and then just tell people to just read the caption, like do a hook and then say read the caption, which there's nothing wrong with that, and you'll
Yeah.
still see that
Yeah.
content. And there, again, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But I do think that there's going to be a shift, even more so in 2024, to more of like this longer form content. And you might be laughing, like if you're someone who does YouTube or podcasts or anything like that, like long form in terms of reels, like might be, 15, 30, 45 seconds, and not necessarily 5, 10, 40 minutes, for videos there.
Mhm.
But that is something that I did see a lot more at the end of 2023 as well. And that's totally a different skill set. And that for me took a little bit of um, figuring out, to go from
Mm.
like doing a 2-second video to then creating a 15-second video that continues to capture attention and gets people to watch throughout. That is like it's a whole different approach to creating reels there. So those are like the two things that I would say look at your hooks, and then try experimenting with keeping people on the screen a little bit longer, so
Mhm.
having a little bit longer reels.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. In terms of like the length thing, what I've found is there's definitely a sweet spot, and it's definitely longer than it used to be. I totally agree. It used to be like a few seconds, and then now it's definitely longer. Of course, reels can be up to 90 seconds. I've found that when I go more than 50 seconds, I start getting that like minute 10, minute 20. That's a long time. Like that's for a lot of people, double, triple, quadruple how long they're watching their other content on their feed. And so that is tough to do unless it's just like a very complex explanation. Like there's few and far between posts that really do well that are that long, but usually they're definitely shorter, like you were saying. I'm curious, first and foremost, I wanted to let you or let the audience know, because we were talking off air, you do have a hooks freebie that they can download. So can you let them know about that? And I'll link it up in the show notes so they can click on it and find it very easily.
Yeah, so I created a hooks guide when I very first started my business. So all the way back in 2021, I created a hooks guide, and I actually just created a part 2 that's like more of an updated version. And so everything that I just talked through of like creating more storytelling hooks, it actually walks you through examples of what does a storytelling hook look like, and how can you take, a generic hook like how to do XYZ and turn that into a storytelling hook. And it breaks down different examples of hooks that you can use that are going to be more eye catching to audiences in 2024.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Yeah. So I'll link that up. Thank you so much for providing that. You posted recently, and this is the last question before we're going to get into the money making topic. So this is the last question about strategy. You made a post recently talking about how you have different goals, and you recommend having different goals for each reel. And so let's start with, what form of engagement do you prioritize or do you focus on the majority of the time?
Good question. I would say majority of the time for me in terms of engagement. So for those listening, engagement, like, comment, save, share. For me, Usually I'm trying to go for comments just because I like to create interaction. And this isn't just saying like, and I know this is exactly what people's thoughts are going to right now is ManyChat. ManyChat is a great tool. Don't get me wrong. I think that it's great and it definitely does help to increase comments. But I think for me, like in terms of building a really strong, tight knit community, I want to have conversations with my community. And so that is something that I will always prioritize is having those conversations in my comment section.
Awesome. That makes sense, and that I'm sure makes people feel so much more connected to you, and engaged with the community as a whole. So, follow up question: with this idea in mind of having different goals, very rarely do these different kinds of engagement overlap. So, what I mean by that is like the post that's going to generate a lot of comments usually isn't the type of post that's also going to get a lot of shares, let's say, or the post that's like super share worthy and everyone's just like sending it to their friends, posting on their story. That's usually like the opposite of a post that's getting a ton of saves, that it's like super savable. So, how do you split up between all of the other forms of engagement? So, if comments are your main focus, how do you split it up between like shares and saves and or even just likes?
Yeah, good question. So for me, I kind of see like your content goals in four different categories. So the first one is traffic driving to your Instagram account. So that's more of your what I would consider a viral type of piece of content. So that's the one that again most times people are sharing a lot with their friends. It's getting shared onto the explore page. So that's the first goal. The second goal is driving traffic to somewhere off of Instagram. So usually that's to like an opt-in form for a freebie. Maybe it's linking to a podcast episode. Maybe it's linking to an offer, something along those lines. And what I have found most of the time, anytime that I have a piece of content that's specifically trying to drive traffic somewhere off of Instagram, doesn't perform usually as well in terms of engagement there. But again, like that's the whole purpose of having different goals for different posts. Because if I just went into every single post with the thought process of, oh, my goal is just reach, then I'm going to think that that post was a failure, even though it wasn't a failure because it actually did what it was supposed to do, which is drive traffic off of, Instagram to whatever other platform I was trying to drive traffic to. So that's the second goal. The third one is community building or connection or relationship building, all those underneath the same category there. And that's where the commenting would come in, right? So oftentimes you would post like an inspirational type of reel, or maybe I'm sharing my journey, my story with people, and people are saying, thank you so much for sharing this, or I feel so connected to you, or I've been a part of your journey since day one, those types of comments. That's what's going to really build like camaraderie there. And also, too, people saying, like, I've experienced that too. So that's that third goal. And then I would say the fourth goal is kind of where the other engagement types fit in, which is like saves as well as likes. I don't really like ever create a post just to get likes for it. So I would say the majority if this category would be more so the saves. So that type of content I found to be more of like a tutorial type of content where it's like a step-by-step process type of thing, just because most people would want to like refer back to that. Again, that's not the case all the time. And so what I would say to you is look at your content based around these four goals. Go to your insights and like literally look at filter your insights. So you might filter your insights to look at content that has gotten the most reach. Okay, what are the topics of the content that have gotten the most reach for you within the last 6 months? Okay, those topics might be your viral type of topics. You might be able to reproduce those and get consistent like viral types of results over and over and over again, right? And is that the case for all eternity and infinity? No, like obviously you need to switch up your strategy at some point, but for the next few months that might be that topic that does drive a lot of traffic, or aka reach, non-follower reach, to your Instagram account. Now if you go to your analytics and you filter for saves. Okay, well, what is the post that has the most amount of saves? What are the topics of those posts? Okay, well, those topics are probably the main ones that are going to help me to hit this goal here, which is, engagement. So that's what I would do is I would go through and I would look at your analytics and really look at it from the perspective of like, what is like the goal of each of these pieces of content. And then generally, I would say majority of the time when you do this, you're going to recognize that there are certain topics that fit underneath these four banks. So like there's like anytime that I share my journey or my story consistently, that's going to be a relationship building one, you know? So that's something that you can recognize is different patterns within your own content.
Maya, you are such a wealth of knowledge. Truly, this is. I feel like I'm getting a master class in Instagram, and I hope everyone who's listening is as well. Let's now shift gears and let's land this plane by talking about sales and offers and that sort of thing. And I know you currently have a handful of different offers. You have Stories That Sell, the Around the Clock Masterclass. You're in the middle of kind of like a launch training series right now, and you have the Instagram University. So my question is, with multiple different things that you can promote and offer, how do you choose what to offer? Do you just kind of like equally distribute the love amongst all of them, or do you have one that is like the best converting and so that's where you send people? How do you think about which one you're going to promote?
That's a very good question. So, this is actually something that as of this year, I've thought about a lot more deeply. So, I'm a big believer in the power of having an offer suite, which is different tiers of offers at different price points. So usually you'll hear it explained as like a low ticket, a mid ticket, and a high ticket offer. Low ticket being low cost, mid ticket being mid cost, high ticket obviously being high cost. So I have found that to work very, very well for me inside of my business. But what you do see is a lot of offers in my business. Now, I will say I love creating offers. Like that is just something that like I just love doing. It's something else that I'm very passionate about doing. And so is that to say you have to create as many offers as I have to be successful? Definitely not the case. But what I've been able to do with these offers is utilize them in different places of my business to sell passively. And what I mean by that is I'm not actively selling all of my offers and I'm not trying to like evenly talk about them on my Instagram stories. It's not like Mondays I talk about Stories That Sell. Tuesdays I talk about IG Universe. I don't think about it in that way. I think about it as, okay, what are the main offers that I have? The main offers are going to be the ones that I filter through and talk about mainly on my Instagram stories as well as on my feed post. Now, outside of those main offers, do I still have other offers? Yeah, 110%. Now, where do I talk about those? I might send out sales emails to people who are on my newsletter list, pitching one of those offers inside of that email. I also will have email sequences that are specifically set up to nurture and then to sell people into these offers. So it's like happening almost like behind the scenes. Obviously, if you're going through that sequence, you're seeing it actively, but like from a perspective of like looking at where I sell in my business, that's a behind the scenes type of thing. Other places in my business, I have like Tripwire set up for my email list. So when you opt in for my freebie, if you opt in for the 150 free hooks guide, you're going to see a page that pops up and it's going to have an offer there. That's a low ticket offer that you can purchase. You don't have to purchase it, but it's available there. And that's really truly one of the only places that I actively am selling that specific offer. So I'm basically like, I'm utilizing a lot of different places in my business to automate sales for these other offers that are not like necessarily my big money making offers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally does. That totally does. And I appreciate you explaining for anyone who's listening and they're like, and opt in with a tripwire with thank you for explaining. So basically, when they go to grab those free hooks that you talked about earlier, they'll see a pop up, which is triggered by a tripwire. That's like the fancy marketing term. And then they're getting sold something that you don't necessarily promote or sell anywhere else. So that's very interesting. I'm curious, like, now you have a bunch of different offers, you have a bunch of different things that you can sell and promote. What was the first thing that you specifically created that you then sold and offered to your audience?
I'm laughing because the first thing that I ever created was an ebook. It's called The Ultimate Guide to Instagram, and I actually still sell it to this day. Now, the version of what I sell today is very different than what it looked like when I very first launched it. But I'm laughing because I'm not a copywriter whatsoever. Like that was actually the very first thing that I hired out when I hired in my business was like copywriting. I was like, I cannot do this. So it's so funny to me that looking back on my journey, for whatever reason, I thought that an ebook was the great thing to do. But an ebook was the very first thing that I created. I think it was 45 pages, and it was just like the very basics of navigating Instagram. So I ran through a few settings on Instagram and like showed some pictures of like what an aesthetic feed looks like versus what it doesn't look like. So it was very basics. And again, I truthfully looking back had no idea what I was doing when I created that offer. But that's also sometimes the best part of our journeys.
Yeah, I agree. So that was a 45-page ebook. Did you sell it or was it a freemium?
I sold it. So I sold it for $45. And it's still $45 to this day, even though I've doubled the amount of content that's inside of it. So I update it once per year and I still sell it. It's $45. And that's actually one of the tripwires that I use inside of my email list. So if you opt in for one of my freebies, then you're going to see that pop up and it's actually going to be popping up for a discounted price point. And that's truly the only time I ever sell that. You can purchase it through my website, like on my shop page, but I don't ever actively promote it outside of that.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So $45 for 45 pages. I think that makes sense. How did you come up with not just the price for that, but the price for all of your different offers and products? Is there like a formula you use? Is it a gut feeling? Is it competitor analysis? How do you come up with the price of things?
Yeah, good question. So when I very first started out, like pricing my offers and creating offers in general, there was just a lot of trial and error. Obviously the ebook is still the same price point now, and I feel like it's valued like it's a good value for the price point. But the next offer that I created after that, well, outside of one-on-one coaching, my first course that I created was called Real Talk, and I severely underpriced that. I had no idea what I was doing. Again, at the beginning of my journey, offer creation, I was just like, let's just see what happens. And so I actually I originally priced that at $97 and I launched that in October. And then within by February of the next year, I increased it to 247. And I added a few things to it as well, but it was just severely underpriced. And I had a lot of people who were like, whoa, like, why are you charging? Like, why aren't you charging more for this? And so that was kind of just like that wake up call for me of like, oh, like I can charge more for this. And so there was a lot of like trial and error learning at the beginning of when I priced my offers versus now when I price my offers. It's not so much like, I don't do any sort of competitor analysis. I don't really look at anyone else's prices. For me, it's just like whatever I feel the value is. And so I can give a perfect example. So Autopilot Empire is the masterclass that I'm actually doing this week. So when this podcast episode goes live, that was actually last week. But this is my latest offer that I'm doing right now, and it's a live masterclass. And I've actually increased the price point 4 different times. So as I've been building out this masterclass, I'm like, wait a second, there's actually a lot more value here. There's a lot more, tangible, implementable results that people are going to get that's going to help them to make even more money. And so I'm like, okay, the value's increasing, the price is increasing. So it's not like, oh, it's just this one set price point. Like all of my master classes are not $147. Like some of them are 300, some of them are 97. I even have some of them that are 67. So it totally just depends on what I truly feel is best in terms of the value, but I also look a lot at the outcome that people are going to get out of this. Like, what is that thing where if they do implement this, they do actually take action? What is the result that they're going to get? The higher the result, whether that be, more followers on Instagram, whether that be more money that they're making, whether that be, a deeper brand connection, whatever that outcome may be, the more that it is, the more that the price point is going to be increased.
Gotcha. That totally makes sense. Well, Maya, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it so much. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I hope people took notes because I know that I was literally taking notes while you were speaking today, and I'm excited to think about some of your answers and put them into practice for my own business and my own account. So thank you for being here, and I'll let you get back to the rest of your life.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening. I told you Maya would be a wealth of knowledge. Before you go, I have 2 quick announcements that I wanted to let you know about, or really 3. The first one is just some gratitude. Thank you so much for listening. The podcast week over week continues to increase in downloads, and so I wanted to say thank you so much for listening today. The second thing that I wanted to say is, speaking of downloads, some of you may or may not know, but the amount of stats and insights that we get as podcasters as to what's going on with our shows is very minimal. Unlike like Instagram or YouTube or TikTok where you have a lot of stats and you know how long people are watching or listening and commenting and liking and all that stuff, the only statistic that I really know of for this show is downloads. So even if you listen from start to finish, if you don't follow and or download each episode, I have no idea that you listen. So I wanted to say that quickly to let you know how important it is to me that you download the episode. What's in it for you? That means once you download that you can listen to the podcast at any time, anywhere, whether or not your Wi-Fi is strong or turned on. So I highly recommend following, if not downloading every single episode that you plan on listening to. And hey, if you want to be extra nice, you could go back and download the episodes that you've already listened to. And then the third and final announcement that I wanted to make is around the importance of reviews. That is really the only other statistic or feedback that I get as a podcast host. So it's a little bit different depending on what podcast platform you're listening on, whether you're on Amazon Music or Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Pretty much the main idea is that you should go to the main page of the podcast where you can kind of see the description of the show and the list of all the other episodes. And then somewhere on that page, you should see previous reviews that have been left. And then around there, if you click on that, you should see a button that says write a review, leave a review. You might see a 5 stars where they're not filled in. And you can, if you're on Apple, tap the number of stars that you would rate this podcast. But I say all of that to say that it would really mean a lot to me if you left a review of this podcast. I truly do read every single review and I do take them to heart. And we have already made quite a few adjustments to this podcast based off the reviews that you have been giving. If nothing else, if you want me to hear your feedback and you can't figure out how to leave a review on the app that you are listening to, feel free to shoot me a direct message on Instagram and I would love to hear from you there. But as always, thank you so much for listening today and I'll see you next time.